Today's story is Not Usual by David Chevalier. Karen found herself looking over the smooth mahogany casket once again. Most everyone had left by that point, but she saw that Jill, the being of pure energy from accounting, had remained behind. It was difficult to tell, from the vaguely humanoid form that beings of pure energy generally assumed around humans, whether she was upset or not. But Karen was worried that her feelings had been hurt. Just then, perhaps sensing that Karen was thinking about her, entirely possible for a being of pure energy, Jill's bluish form glided eerily over. "Thank you," Karen said, laying a hand on the casket and trying her best to sound grateful. "And thank you so much for coming." "You're most welcome. I am happy to have been invited to your ritual. Please, can you confirm? Was my offering acceptable to you?" Acceptable? Karen looked down at the long table, at the other gifts, small brightly colored toys, large print books covered in drawings of cartoon animals, and piles of tiny clothes. "It is lovely," she hesitated. "It's just that it isn't usual to give a casket at a baby shower." There was no reply. After an awkward silence, Karen gradually became aware of a low hum, quiet at first, then increasing in volume. Soon a second tone emerged, and then a third, forming a minor chord. There was a pulsing quality to the sound, and Karen suddenly became aware that Jill's shimmering form was pulsing at the same frequency. "Oh my! Are you crying?" The hum increased in volume. "Oh, Karen, I've ruined your celebration, haven't I? I was afraid that I had. I had heard that every human needs one of these, and I wanted to get you one for your offspring before someone else had." "Oh, no, I only said that it wasn't usual. It's okay. I like it very much. Please, stop crying." The hum faded, but didn't stop. "It's just that I value our friendship so much, Karen. It's never been easy for me to make friends. I've always been awkward, even among my own kind." "Please, you're being silly. I'm glad to have you as a friend, too." The hum faded to silence. "Then you like it?" "Yes, and I will have need for it, just not for a very long time, I hope. In the meantime, I can use it as a changing station." "So, still friends?" Jill asked. "Yes, of course. Please don't give it another thought." They stood silently for a few moments, and when Jill gave no indication of moving along, Karen continued gently. "I do have quite a lot to sort through, though. So, I guess I'll see you on Monday?" "Yes, I'm so happy for you, and I simply can't wait to witness the expulsion." It took Karen several seconds to realize that Jill had just invited herself into the delivery room. She forced a smile as Jill's bluish form turned and glided out of the room. "Won't that be nice?" Hello, everyone, and welcome to Utopia Science Fiction, the podcast. What does a painter sing when he's in dire straits? Monet for nothing. I am Tristan Everts, the editor of Utopia Science Fiction, and I am joined here with our design editor, Jonathan S. And today we have a very special guest with us, one of our regular artist contributors of the magazine. We have Haley Grunloh. So, hello, everyone. Welcome, Haley.
You put a lot of pressure on me saying I'm a very special guest. I don't know if I can live up to being very special. You can say a very average but competent artist. A workaday artist.
All right, so on this episode, we are going to talk about artwork, which Utopia Science Fiction has actually gained a lot of attention for. People compliment us on our artwork quite a lot.
What's the best compliment you've got?
There's the artist Debbie Hughes, who is big in like comic and science fiction art back in the 80s. One of the first women to really start doing science fiction artwork for the pulp magazines. And she complimented our artwork, the cover art specifically.
That's so cool.
So before we start talking about anything, I do just want to take a very quick moment and tell everyone that we have a super amazing December issue planned for Utopia Science Fiction. We are going to be doing an art expose, and we're going to be featuring the artwork of a bunch of different artists, along with a few stories and poems and a science corner, maybe. But we'll be featuring a lot of artists. They'll be showing their work, people from around the world. So you don't want to miss that when that comes out.
What kind of places around the world did you get art submissions from? What's the most exotic one?
Ooh, but there was someone from the Middle East, Iranian?
That's pretty exotic.
Oh, cool. Yeah. He's the one that does photography.
Science fiction photography.
Magical realism, I guess, is the better word for it. But he's gained international recognition for his work, which is really awesome, too.
Well, we're recognizing him anyway. I don't know how much that counts, but...
Every little bit helps.
All right, so, Jonathan, do you want to start us off? Do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of processes you go through when you're doing work for Utopia Science Fiction?
Sure. Yeah. Usually, because I'm using an outdated version of InDesign, I have to do all of the formatting manually. So, like, if the story has italics or indents, I have to do that in the program itself. I can't just copy it over from Microsoft for some reason. I usually end up just skimming through stories, and if there's some language that catches my eye and makes me think, oh, that would be perfect for the cover, I start to sort of jot down notes. I talk it over with Tristan to make sure that I'm not doing a piece that someone else has already done. And then I sometimes do thumbnail sketches, and I open up a 3D rendering program called DAZ 3D.
Cool, 3D.
It's free, but what you pay for is all of the props, character morphs, that kind of thing. And so I set up a scene and render that out.
So you don't, like, have to build all the models yourself. You, like, find stuff and then sort of remix it into an illustration?
Yeah, pretty much. I've been sort of kind of trying to get away from that, but...
Modeling's hard. At least, I think it's hard.
Oh yeah. I haven't done anything since a couple of very quick, very basic models in SketchUp, and that was more than 10 years ago. So, yeah, most of my work has been...
Do you do all the, like, lighting and texture kind of stuff in this other program?
I usually have to do at least a couple of passes, because the lighting in the raw render isn't quite good enough, or I need to get something more dramatic out of it.
Do you just do most everything in the 3D program, or you do anything to it in, like, Photoshop or something afterwards? Like, do you add any?
I do add a lot of effects in Photoshop, and I sort of use... I don't know how to explain this. I know that a lot of visual effects, they don't... Like, if you're looking at the Enterprise and, like, say, the Next Generation, they actually do multiple different passes and then combine them to create the final image. So, like, there's a pass where they have a light shining on the model, they have a pass where they have just the warp engines, and a pass where they just have the windows, and they lay them on top of each other to create the final image. And so I do something similar.
But, like, didn't the original Enterprise was, like, a little model that they took photographs of, like a real life model, not a digital model, in the old one. You can go see it in the Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
Yep. And it's definitely not tiny. It's over 11 feet long, and it remains the largest ever built for Star Trek.
I didn't know that. That's cool. Would you ever build a model and take photographs of it for an illustration? Is that like too extra?
I'd probably build a physical model, but a digital one is way out of my skill set at the moment.
And Jonathan, you had mentioned changing the art for this season's cover art. You had mentioned trying something different. Can you explain or elaborate or go into that just a bit more?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to get away from doing the 3D rendering because eventually, like, all you have to do is go onto the DAZ 3D website or some other site that has content for Poser and DAZ, and you can probably find the stuff that I used. So I'm trying to do a little bit more imaginative work. One of my artistic heroes is a man by the name of James Gurney. This guy who wrote and illustrated the Dinotopia books.
Oh, those are some of my things ever. They're so beautiful.
A few years ago, he put out a book called Imaginative Realism, and so I'm sort of trying to follow some of the process that he lays out in that book.
So the Dinotopia, those are definitely like traditional paintings. Is he still sticking with that? I loved those books as a kid, but I have not like kept up with his career or anything. Is he like made the transfer to digital art, or is he still just like making beautiful watercolors?
He's still doing traditional work in oils and watercolors.
I'm gonna have to look him up.
One of the things I'm looking into for the covers, though it's going to take a lot longer than it does with DAZ 3D, is to put together like a quick maquette, just basically a small traditional model, and photograph that and use that as a reference for what I'm drawing and painting.
Have you ever used a 3D scanner?
No, I haven't.
I really want to try one. We have one at the library. Nobody knows how to use it.
So are you using a special program for these new works, Jonathan, or?
I may still end up using DAZ 3D for the initial composition. Depends on how long it takes. But I'm going to try to do more of a mixed media painting.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing this.
What is your favorite subject for your illustrations?
That's a tough one. Usually it would either be creatures or spaceships.
Yay! Okay, that's all. That's all I had. Creatures are good. Creatures are always fun.
So Haley, do you have a process when you sit down and do your artwork for the magazine or for your own projects? Do you have like a certain process or kind of thing that you go through when you start working on things?
I guess I have a lot of different techniques and things that I use. I think for all the things I've made for Utopia, each one has been a little bit of a different process.
Which process do you prefer?
I guess they all are good for different things. Let's see. I think the one I did that was like a little insect paintings. Those were just traditional media ink on watercolor paper. Like I start with the black ink and then I work up off the ink with watercolor and gouache. So those are pretty simple, like traditional paintings. The one with the orange alien guy, that's a digital painting. I used Photoshop. So you start with a little rough outline, and then you usually sort of start with digital paintings. You have this sketch first, and then you fill in like blocks of color so that you can see sort of like how the whole thing is like balanced with the different colors. I like stuff that's bright and colorful, so but you have to get the colors to sort of work together in the right way to get the composition so that it looks nice. And then once you're sort of happy with the sort of overall ambiance of the piece, then I sort of go in and add little details, textures and things, just with Photoshop brushes. And fun story, that the orange alien was actually, I just finished that painting on my old ancient laptop, and that was the last thing I did with that laptop before it died completely.
Oh no!
I finished that painting and I sent it to Tristan, and then the next day I opened up the laptop and I couldn't get it to turn on. It was just dead.
It gave its life like
It
a
gave
true
its-
artist.
it was
put its
its-
heart and soul
That was its
into this
last.
painting.
Its last hurrah was that orange guy. Yeah, and that was a fully all digital painting, start finished it in Photoshop. What else? Oh, there's the painting of the little ship and the star that was to go with a poem. That one I actually started with an ink drawing on regular paper, drawing like the simple outline, and then I put it in GIMP, which is what I have now that I don't have Photoshop on my old laptop anymore, because it was a really, really old version of Photoshop. And then I added all the colors and swirly stuff in GIMP. Because I'm a pro. So that's how I made those paintings.
You use what you can get your hands on.
Yeah, I'm so used to using Photoshop for everything. And I'm like, but I don't believe in paying money for things. So now I'm using GIMP because it's free. And it's like, it does pretty much like what I need it to do, but it's sort of like the setup is so similar to Photoshop, but it's just off a little bit. It's like the uncanny valley. Like
Yeah, I was never able to really work with it.
I only really use it for painting. I'm not really doing really sophisticated photo manipulation. So as long as it's like got brushes and colors, like that's all you really need for what I'm doing. But it's just like I'm not used to like the buttons being in slightly different places, and the keyboard shortcuts are not the same, and it's disorienting for me. I'm still getting used to it.
I pretty much am stuck with this outdated version of the Creative Suite, which they put out for free as an attempt, and I think it failed, to stop the piracy issue. And now they have this subscription-based model, and that honestly pisses me off.
Everyone hates the Photoshop subscription. Yeah, no one wants that.
When you're on a really tight budget, it's one thing if you're working for a company, the subscription just gets added to the budget, but if you're working for yourself, you're pretty much screwed if you go dry on commission work.
Yeah, no, they should just let you pay for it one time and have it forever, like they used to.
That's why I switched to Clip Studio Paint. They still have that pay once and you're done.
How do you like Clip Studio Paint?
I think I like it better than Photoshop, actually, especially for digital linking. They have something that they call stabilization, I think, and so it sort of takes a little bit of the wobble out of your inking, especially if you don't have a separate screen, or like one of those fancy screen tablets. Like I have an old, just regular tablet where you draw off to the side.
Right. I actually just, like, as a birthday present to myself, I bought a fancy Cintiq screen.
Ooh.
And I love it so much.
Nice.
I'm gonna marry it. I had a little Intuos like Wacom tablet for a really long time, and it's not like super glamorous, but I liked it. Like I made a lot of stuff that I was proud of with it.
This is another question for both of you. Do you have a favorite science fiction artist? And if so, who is it?
Well, I've already mentioned James Gurney, but there's also Andrew Probert. He designed the Enterprise refit for the first movie. And, of course, there's also John Eaves, who designed the changes to the Enterprise B for Generations, and he designed the Enterprise E. And he's also the one responsible for all of the Starfleet ships in Discovery and Picard.
Ah, so he drew that one ship that they just duplicated like 10,000 times at the end of Picard?
Yes.
It was the worst scene
Yeah.
ever. It was a giant fleet, but it was just the
Yeah.
same ship. It was like watching those scenes from like Braveheart where they've taken like two or three people and they've replicated them to make an army, and it's just the same three people. It's just the same ship.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it looks like it was pulled right out of, like, Star Trek Online 5 years ago.
Maybe it was. Maybe that's the secret. So I'm a fan of David A. Hardy. He does like astro art, astronomy art. So it's kind of realistic ideas of what other planets might look like.
Oh, I just watched this really interesting lecture that was on a guy doing space art, but like not from a science fiction kind of perspective, more from like sticking very closely to science and what we know. I wish I remembered the guy's name. It was really an interesting lecture. Sorry. That was unhelpful. Okay, I'm sort of less interested in the science fiction than I am like with fantasy art. I think one of my favorite fantasy artists is Brian Froud and his wife Wendy Froud. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Brian Froud, probably you know him as the like artist behind the movie Labyrinth and the movie The Dark Crystal. He worked with Jim Henson and designed everything. But he's also like a really amazing painter, does really interesting fairy art. He's written some sort of like guide to fairyland kind of books. They have really, really interesting drawings and paintings in them. And Wendy Froud, who is married to him, she is an amazingly talented sculptor and doll maker. She makes these very like lifelike but fantastical little dolls, like little goblins and elves and fairies and little people. And she does it all herself. Like she sculpts them and she sews their like little dresses, and they just look like so magical. She also, I think, worked on Labyrinth and those movies. And she actually, this is a fun fact about her, she designed, and created the original Yoda puppet for Star Wars. That was Wendy Froud. So I think she's really cool. Another of my favorite fantasy artists is Paul Kidby. He's known for being the illustrator for Terry Pratchett's Discworld books, if you're a fan of those, which I guess are kind of technically science fiction. They're like, they're sort of science fiction, but also fantasy, but also like social satire. But Paul Kidby, some amazing illustrations for those. They're very like he's a really skilled technical artist, but he also his work has so much like subtlety and humor to it, and it's really good. And there are more artists that I like, but I don't know how long you want me to talk.
We'll have to do that in another episode. We'll have to just have a whole list of you telling us your favorite artists.
And of course, I just realized I spent my whole answer talking about Star Trek artists. There's, of course, Ralph McQuarrie.
Okay, who is Ralph McQuarrie?
He's the guy who did the work for Star Wars. And to be blunt, if not for him, I don't think Star Wars would have even been made. Because I think Lucas commissioned him to do some paintings to take with him to pitch meetings with the studios so that they'd get an idea for what he was envisioning with Star Wars. And there's also Sid Mead, and I'm trying to think of someone else. I guess I could count H.R. Giger, technically, for his work on Alien.
He freaks me out.
Yeah. Well, at least he freaks himself out. Or freaked himself out, actually. A lot of his stuff is definitely disturbing, but I love how he blended the machine with the organic.
Yeah. Isn't like in Europe somewhere there's a museum dedicated to him? Like a whole museum of H.R. Giger.
That sounds like it'd be a spooky place to like work at. You'd have his artwork
I don't
all
know.
around you.
They're just like aliens working there, is my assumption. That's who runs the museum. They're just like these horrible, spooky creatures. They're like, Museum
Is that the
directors,
museum
like,
that people enter the museum and then they never come out again?
exactly.
Well, they come out again, just not the same.
What draws you to science fiction art? Like, what appeals to you about it? Is there a particular illustration or book or some kind of art that stands out that you remember from like when you were fairly young that like made an impression on you?
It would probably be Star Trek.
Like the show or some kind of like tie-in art?
Definitely the show. My sister got me started on it when I was about 3.5, and I have not been able to put Star Trek down since.
As a 3.5-year-old, like how much did you really comprehend about like what was happening in Star Trek?
Absolutely nothing.
Just like the atmosphere of it, or like the funny costumes and stuff.
I think it might have been a bit of the atmosphere. Of course, being a boy, it didn't hurt that it was also kind of action adventure. Like, I don't remember what episode it was that I actually first watched, but I do vaguely remember watching the series finale of The Next Generation and really loving it. Didn't understand anything that was going on, but I enjoyed it anyway.
Even if you don't understand the plot, you still like pick up on all the atmosphere and like emotions happening, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of artists that have started following Utopia Science Fiction. Do you have any advice as artists yourself?
My advice is never give up, but my serious advice is don't do what I did and try to focus too much on one thing. Try to do as much variety as you can into your work, especially when you're starting out, and you'll find that you can incorporate a lot of what you're learning from doing all those things into your science fiction or fantasy art.
Oh, that's pretty good advice, actually. Yeah. I definitely think, like, if you want to do really good artwork that is sort of traditional and looks believable, it's always good to practice all the figure drawing and, like, light and color and all the boring academic kind of art. Like, you know, the traditional technical skills will prop up your more fantastical designs. My advice to other artists is, I think the quality over quantity adage is 100% wrong when it comes to practicing your art. I think you should just make as much stuff as you can and practice as often as you can, and don't worry about it being good or not. Just make art all the time, like whenever you feel like it. And if it's bad, then just like put it away in a folder and make the next thing. Instead of like, you know, don't agonize over one thing, and if you're frustrated with a project or something, don't sit there and try to make it perfect when you're frustrated. Like, just make the next thing. Just decide that it's finished and it's not that good, and like make the next thing. And eventually you'll have so much stuff that like some of it will be good.
And I can speak from experience, having spent the last few years doing DAZ 3D, which was something I was hesitant to get into, and just find some of my early work on DeviantArt.
DeviantArt! Man, I probably still have a DeviantArt, and now I'm worried. I should go find it and get rid of it.
So my personal recommendation for an art website is ArtStation.
Utopia Science Fiction recently had its first art competition, and both of you acted as judges on that art competition. Can you tell me your thoughts about that?
I was surprised by how many entries we got.
Yeah. We had 25 submissions, which is like 10 to 15 more than I thought we would have. So we got a lot.
Well, I was impressed with the variety of different techniques and subject matter and like styles that you guys got. A lot of it wasn't like I was sort of expecting there to be more like straightforward, more traditional illustration, like here's a guy doing something, or like here's an alien, or but there's a lot of sort of like
Mm.
weird, interesting, like where it's sort of semi abstracted, or I don't know what you would call it, mixed
Yeah,
media, cool stuff, but it's not just a classic painting where there's like characters in a background and that kind of thing.
there was quite an interesting variety. There were some tough decisions that I had to make, especially as the graphic designer, because there were a couple that were very, very good, but they'd be about half an inch on the whole page.
So what did you take into account when you were deciding the winners? Was there any particular guidelines you were looking to? I don't think we'd ever discussed this between the judges. So what did you look at when you chose the winner? What was particularly appealing to you?
I think composition is important and technical skill.
I think there's also what aesthetics that comes into play. Since I'm not really an artist at all, that's more of what I think of when I was judging. So I was thinking of aesthetics and if there's any of the submissions that would tie in well to a story that we had upcoming. I tended to recommend or at least put those on the long list or the short list.
Yeah, what I tended to look at was, and I know that you and I actually disagreed on one of them, which it was the photograph, where I felt it was dystopian with maybe just a ray of hope. That was, of course, the photo of the.
This is the one with the like sky mirror things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that one, but I guess I wasn't really thinking too much about like, does this fit the Utopia theme or not? I was just like, it's a really cool image.
Yeah, and like my eye went right to the radioactive labels on the barrels, and I was like, yes, this is a very beautiful image, but this feels dystopian rather than utopian.
So the person who really thought of it as a kind of utopian image is not the person who's here. The judge was Leon, fourth judge we had in this. I think it was definitely more of a hopeful image, even if it was kind of stark, just because it had those that blue sky, which played in such strong.
Yeah.
It played in such strong contrast to everything around it that was kind of the focus of the image. So it's more hope in that kind of scene.
I didn't even think that hard about it. I was like, it looks cool. I think I'm trying to remember which ones I voted for. The flying cats. I liked that one because it was a nice
That was
painting.
great. That was fantastic.
I thought it
I loved
was
it.
yeah. I thought it was like a nicely rendered painting or a digital painting. I'm not sure what the medium was. And it's just who doesn't love some flying cats? And it had really nice, like, interesting colors.
So I was fairly organized. I put them into like folders like contenders, and then top 5, and then I picked my top 3 out of those.
I think I did something similar where I sort of narrowed it down top 5 to then like, okay, I gotta pick 3.
It wasn't easy just picking the contenders and then narrowing it down to 5. But one of my favorites that hasn't been featured, at least not yet, is the astronaut on the surfboard.
Oh, yeah. That one's really cute.
So that one is actually, I've been in contact with the artist, and that will be our cover art for the December issue.
Oh, wow.
Spoilers! But yeah, it is awesome.
That was a fantastic art piece. All right, perfect. So I think that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Haley, for joining us as a special guest. It was wonderful to have you here. You've been listening to Utopia Science Fiction, the podcast. If you like what you've heard today, if you want to hear some of the things that didn't make the cut, we have extra content available on our patreon.com. So please consider supporting us through Patreon. Your contributions make all the difference in the world and help us to continue to publish our amazing magazine and pay our authors and artists like the one who guest starred in our podcast today. If you want to know more about Haley Grunloh's specific work, please check the link below, which leads to her website. A huge shout out to those who have started to support us through Patreon. A huge shout out to Judith S. Pratt, Gareth Davis, Jake Spinney, Jean Lee, David Perlmutter, and Elena Gomel for your contributions. Thank you. The story we read today was Not Usual by David Chevalier, and it can be found, along with many other amazing, fantastic stories, in our latest August issue, which can be found on our current issues tab on our website at utopiasciencefiction.com. And now, dear listener, dear reader, let us go forth boldly into the unknown, into the wonder of tomorrow. I leave you with our refrain, let us go onward, ever onward, onward through the impossible.